If I could, anyone that has a cell phone, would you please check it and go ahead and cut it off now? Or put it on vibrate or whatever suits your fancy. We just don't want to hear it. We do have a quorum in attendance. All right, I hereby call this meeting to order. Somebody down there, is there a member wishing to be heard before we get started? Very good. Thank you, ma'am. First off, Mr. Elam. We have in front of us House Bill 251. It was heard in subcommittee. I think the problems have been worked out of that bill.
And I deeply appreciate your patience. We've worked very, very hard on this, and I would think I'd like to thank Representative Cook and Gravely, and especially thank Representative Jasper for helping us make this a much, much better bill than we started. It has two major parts. It's going to provide folks who are in need during a state of emergency with assistance, and it's going to protect private property. And the first 5 lines of the bill, it specifically talks about Department of Correction folks can go on to private property.
Could you tell us which substitute, give us the last digits in the top right corner?
1463 Echo Romeo Sierra 3 ERS.
That's correct. Go right ahead.
Okay. And the first 5 lines specifically talk about Department of Corrections personnel. They can go into private property during a state of emergency, only during that period, to assist. And the last 3 lines talk specifically about protecting private property. And if a private property owner does not want them to come on this private property, all he or she has to do is tell them that they don't want them there and ask them to leave. And that's the bill, sir.
All right. Number 23, Mr. Jasper, Chairman Jaspers.
I just want to tell you, Representative, thank you for working with me and other members on corrective language, and I appreciate your cooperation. I'm very much in favor of that.
Thank you, sir.
Any other members have any questions? Mr. Bill.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
I think we're almost at the appropriate time. Any questions from any of the committee members? Not this would be the right time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I make a motion to do pass.
We have a motion to pass. Second. We have a second. Any further questions? Any comments? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes clearly have it. Thank you, Representative.
And I also like to thank Representative Frazier and Jackson for helping me. Thank you.
Good deal. Mr. Pezoid, House Bill 79. And are we working from a substitute?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are. We are working from LC 41 1038S. If you all feel like you're experiencing deja vu, it's because this committee has heard this bill each of the last 2 years. This bill passed out of the House near unanimously last year. It deals with the information and data gleaned from using automated license plate reader systems. As passed last year, the limit was 1 year, but in order to shore up the code due to Representative or Chairman Hitchens' bill last year, we made a few changes with the help of Colonel McDonough of GSP. Line 23, we added in the word federal. Lines 27 and 28 for law enforcement purpose. It means the investigation of an offense or activity initiated by a law enforcement agency. Line 33, we changed 1 year to 30 months. And line 36, law enforcement agencies may exchange or share captured license plate data. So the or share was added in. And I will gladly accept any questions from the members of the committee.
I believe the third year is a charm.
Third time's a charm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from any of the committee members? I guess third time's better than a charm. It's wore the committee out.
I concur.
This would be the time. We have a motion and a second. Any further questions from any of the committee members? Any comments? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Nay? Ayes clearly have it.
Thank you.
Let's- Mr. Seltzler here. Chairman Seltzler. Chairman Hitchens, 320.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring substitute for House Bill 320. It's LC 411082S. And with me here today is Mr. Craig Orland from Washington, D.C., who is an employee of Honda Motor Company. And what we're what we're looking at today with these is something that I was unaware of until the beginning of this year, and that's counterfeit airbags in vehicles. There's an industry that's arisen predominantly in China that are making counterfeit airbags for replacements in automobiles that have been wrecked or had damaged airbags. And generally speaking, most of them don't work effectively. Each year, make, and model vehicle has a computer that differentiates between every airbag. So if you put the wrong airbag in, it doesn't work. And some of the people, as we know with the Volkswagens, there's a system in these that's supposed to identify an incorrect airbag as you put them in the vehicle. Well, just like with the Volkswagens, with the exhaust emissions and all our computers, if there's a computer that is able to detect something, there are people who work on computers that are able to bypass it. And in many cases now, they've developed the technology where they can bypass it. You put an airbag in your vehicle that you think is going to protect you and your family, have an accident, and it either doesn't deploy or it deploys with such ferocity that it can hurt people. The FBI has confiscated many of these coming in U.S. Customs off of ships and charged them with copyright violations. They do the packaging that mimics the packaging that's done here in the United States or with the automobile manufacturers. But if they don't violate copyright laws, the federal government can't charge them. Many of the side airbags don't have identifying material copyrights on them, so if they do that, if they see those, they have to let them slide by. So 14 other states have already enacted these laws to prohibit it. It's a high and aggravated misdemeanor if you catch them, if you sell your vehicle knowing that, or if a shop puts them in knowingly, it would be a violation. I'd like to let Mr. Orland speak to it more specifically.
Thank you. So the existing law in Georgia prohibits the installation or reinstallation of what I'll call just a junk airbag, an airbag that's not designed to work. This law would expand that to prohibit the importation, the manufacture, the sale, the offer for sale, so we can go after the people who are really trafficking in these products. One man in North Carolina was recently convicted by the federal government. He had made over $1.3 million in just over a year selling these airbags. And as Representative Hitchens mentioned, this technology is very complicated, so a lot of the counterfeiters don't even bother to try to replicate it. We've pulled in counterfeits that are filled with newspapers, sawdust, T-shirts, you name it, we found it, all sorts of debris. So we're really trying to go after kind of the bad actors here. As he mentioned, the federal agents have limited authority to confiscate these products when they come in, so this would allow them to seize those products. We've worked with a number of stakeholders, the dealers, public safety groups, to get this right, and as he mentioned, we've done this in 14 states. We ask you to join us. Thank you.
All right, any questions from any of the committee members? Ms. Frazier.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Mr. Orleans, you from the Honda?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so now, my good friend out in the audience, former colleague, Mr. Ben Harbin, has convinced me to buy 3 Hondas in the last 4 years. And so now, with you sitting there, I'm thinking there's something wrong with my Honda airbags.
So this bill addresses replacement airbags. So if your vehicle was involved in an accident, you took it to an unscrupulous repair shop, they would buy an airbag off the internet, off eBay or Alibaba or some site like that for $50. They would invoice the insurance company for the full price of an airbag, which would be several hundred. And then that's kind of how that scam operates. This is only replacement airbags. And that's why the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud is also supporting us.
So you're absolutely sure it has nothing to do with my Honda dealership in Augusta?
No, and in fact, actually, a Honda dealership in Duluth recently was doing recall work and pulled out some airbags and found some of these airbags I was talking about with T-shirts that had gone through from a private repair shop. And we've turned that over to the federal authorities who are looking into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from any of the committee members? Author of the bill, this is one that y'all have had a good bit of conversation with auto associations and all. And everybody's in agreement with this
To the
language.
best of my understanding, this is about the third substitute, and it's all about the verbiage to make sure that we had it all correct. And so far as I know, everybody's on board now.
Very good. Any further questions from any of the committee members? If not, Chair will entertain a motion. We have a motion do pass. We have a second. Do you have any further questions from any of the committee members or comments? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes clearly have it. Thank you, Chairman. Let's see here. All right, Mr. Seltzer, are you here? Come on up and join us. House Bill 390. Straight up and down bill, no substitute.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
It's a rarity for this committee. Feel like we're falling down on the job if we can't substitute something.
I think this committee liked that name Powell across the top line. They wanted to keep that in place. So,
Go right ahead, Chairman.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. HB 390 is a very, very simple bill that seeks to, in essence, create two tiers of an existing traffic offense that I believe, and I think many of my constituents, and I believe yours might believe, ought to be treated separately. Currently, disobedience to any traffic control device is a 3-point violation. What this bill recognizes is that there's a broad range of activities that could get caught up in that same one traffic offense. As it stands today, somebody, one of your constituents that was driving through a residential neighborhood, that came to an almost complete stop. Maybe their wheels were turning at 0.5 mile an hour or 1 mile an hour at a stop sign in an unoccupied neighborhood. But there was stopped by a police officer for not fully stopping at a traffic control device, would be given the same 3-point violation as somebody that saw a police officer directing traffic and drove 10 or 15 miles an hour through the traffic control point past an officer. There's only one offense, and it's a 3-point moving violation. What this bill does, it creates two tiers. It leaves in place people who were disobeying a traffic control device at a speed higher than 5 miles per hour and that could potentially impact persons or property, but recognizes that those few cases, or those cases that the vehicle's barely moving, coming to almost a complete stop, and having no impact on public safety, persons or property, wouldn't be decriminalized. This bill does nothing to make that okay. What this bill simply does is it would treat that circumstance in a way that's consistent with driving too fast for conditions. Driving too fast for conditions today under our code, as you can see in the lead up here on HB 390, is a 0-point moving violation that's subject to a fine, but does not bring with it points. An example from my committee that really led to this was a constituent of mine who was driving through a residential neighborhood in my district, and she had heard, a friend of hers that she worked with actually had seen and had been pulled over by a police officer for coming to an almost complete stop in an unoccupied residential neighborhood. The cop pulled him over. It was a 3-point moving violation. It was a $250 fine, which of course accrued to their city. Well, she's driving through the same neighborhood. She sees the police officer parked in this same spot, and says, okay, I see the cop there. I'm going to come to a complete stop and make sure they don't get him like they got, or that they don't get me like they got my friend. Well, she came to an almost complete stop, but the momentum of her car did not move back to designate an absolute complete stop, and he pulled her over for not coming to a complete stop at this stop sign. An unoccupied neighborhood, driving 1 mile per hour as she made a right turn through a stop sign. She brought that to me. She said, Representative, what can we do about this? Clearly, there's no impact on public safety. And as I looked into it, I recognized that she was guilty of the same 3-point moving violation as if somebody drove through a stop sign or a traffic light at 25 miles an hour, or disacknowledged the direction of a traffic control official, a police officer. So what HB 390 does, it simply breaks that up into two separate point violation offenses. It would leave alone those circumstances in which you disobeyed a traffic control device or an officer. But if you were driving less than 5 miles per hour and there was no direct impact on persons or property, it would make a 0-point moving violation and set the maximum fine at $100. Because members of the committee, this doesn't just affect fines and points. If you look at what a 3-point moving violation does on someone's family bottom line, a 3-point moving violation, depending on your insurance and depending on where you are, is a $30 to $35 per month impact on your insurance, which stays on your record for 36 months. So if you think about a $30 impact on someone's insurance for 36 months, plus the $250 that you would pay to a municipality that wrote this ticket, it's a $1,300 hit to a family's bottom line over the course of 3 years for not coming to an absolute complete stop at a stop sign, or not coming to an absolute complete stop if you're making a right turn on red. Look, nothing's coming, there's no impact on public safety, but without coming to an absolute complete stop on a right turn on red, today as it stands is still a 3-point violation in Georgia. And this would allow citizens to be treated differently, still fined, still have to come to a complete stop, doesn't change the law in any way. It would just simply take it from being a 3-point moving violation to being a 0-point moving violation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, must be talking about some city police officers, not the Georgia State Patrol.
I've never seen a state patrolman enforcing stop signs in residential neighborhoods, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've got a question I want to ask on line 48, where you said of a fine of no more than $100. Now, that may mean $100, or that may mean by the time you put the surcharges on, it could be $200. Is your intention to limit that fine to a flat $100 fine?
Mr. Chairman, I'd leave it to the wisdom of the committee. I personally felt like a $100 fine was a clean line. I don't want to get into a dispute with this committee. I felt like $100 plus a 7.25% tack on, or whatever that would be. That's, to me, is not as big of an issue as to make sure that it's limited and that there's a no-point moving violation. Really, the no points is the core of this bill. And again, I would remind members of the committee, if you look on line 27 of the bill, driving too fast for conditions under current Georgia law also brings with it 0 points. So this makes it consistent with driving too fast for conditions.
All right. Number 28.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
hit you.
I was also reading from that same line, begins on line 48, and as I interpret this, if you're going speed greater than 5 miles per hour, or you're a direct threat or harm to persons or property at the time of occurrence, we revert back. So if somebody did this and didn't see somebody coming, pulled out and had an accident, it would be as previously.
That's right, Chairman. If you were driving 2 miles per hour and weren't minding your business and almost hit someone's property or almost hit a person, I think even coming close to a person would trigger this still being a 3-point moving violation. But there are circumstances where there is 0 impact on property, 0 impact on persons, and someone's driving at a speed that's really slower than a fast walk.
You good? Number 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Seltzer, is this just for residential areas?
No, ma'am. I mean, this would apply. I use that as an example that I think many of us can understand. You might imagine if you're coming up to an intersection, maybe in your district, Highway 25, 4-lane, come up to the road, making a right turn on red. I think it's customary for people as they slow down. They're making a right turn onto a road. There's a stoplight. We recognize there's a duty to come to a complete stop before you make your right turn on red and you proceed. If this were a circumstance where somebody on a unbusy highway came to almost a stop and made their right turn on red, they'd still be breaking the law. It just wouldn't be a three-point moving violation. If there's no traffic in sight and there's no one around. So it's not limited just to residential areas, but it's as practical as any circumstance where, again, people making a good faith effort to come to a stop at a stop sign or a right turn on a red that don't come to a complete absolute stop. We want to provide some, I think, some discretion in that not being a three-point moving violation.
Mr. Chairman, I need one more question. And so you're saying 5 miles an hour or what determines for that officer to know that I have not stopped, other than my vehicle didn't tilt back? I mean, what is it, 1 mile per hour or 5 miles per hour? Because you have folks that will come through the stop, will stop, and then they'll just hit the brakes, oop, and keep going.
Right.
So what determines the speed?
I appreciate the question. As it stands now, if you had a constituent, for example, that went into a city solicitor or a county and said, listen, I think I came to a complete stop. Let me see the video. And the solicitor or the police chief rolls the video. You look at the video. Happens all the time. You look at this and you think, you know what? Anyone can see this is a completely safe circumstance. But as it stands today, if the wheels don't come to an absolute stop, the solicitors don't have discretion. All you have is to say it's okay, or to say it's a three-point moving violation. This gives the ability, if, again, in the opinion of a jury or a solicitor or whoever, or judge that looks at this, to say, you know what, I do believe they came to an almost complete stop. 5 miles per hour was kind of a safe number that would definitely catch what we're talking about. I didn't want to get into 10 or 15 miles per hour. That starts to feel like you're running a stop sign. I didn't want to get into that. But 5 miles per hour is a brisk walking speed, and it gives people the ability to go to a judge and say, Your Honor, I was not going more than 5 miles per hour. You can tell I came to I made a good faith effort to slow down and be safe. This should not be a three-point moving violation.
So actually, all I would do is get a fine up to $100 and no points taken.
That's correct.
Thank you.
The judge would now have that option to give you that as opposed to 3 points. And yes, ma'am.
Any other questions from any of the committee members? Everybody's on good behavior today. If not, what's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion do pass. Do we have a second? Any further? All right. Any further questions from any of the committee members? Any comments? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes clearly have it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
All right, I'm gonna bring up, House Bill 350. This should be, LC 411105S as a substitute. To the committee members, this is a Department of Corrections, bill that they requested under Section 1. Section 1 and 2 was cleanup language on tobacco. One of the bigger problems they have in penal institutions today is gang violence, and the inmates themselves. Any and all things are basically a commodity to be bargained, which gets into the safety not only of the guards but of the inmates themselves. People that are bringing tobacco in, they're smuggling this in. Cigarettes and tobacco has a commodity value. This basically spells out the language for folks smuggling it in, that they'd be guilty of a felony. Let's see, let me check up on this. Be guilty of a misdemeanor on the first offense. Gives them tools. It gives the Department of Correction tools so that they can notify if a visitor's coming into a prison. There's signs clearly posted, and if they're told to if they have, say, a pack of cigarettes in their pocket or something like that, take them out, take them back to the car, throw them in the trash or something. Just a tool that they can use. Second part of this bill, Section 3, deals with inmate cards. And the definition is value cards, but these are like the store cards that they use. Some people may wish to smuggle in credit cards, ID cards, and these type of things. These are tools that the Department of Corrections want to ban these as contraband, to declare these as contraband, to keep them out of the hands of the inmates. That's just quite frankly a very simple bill, probably the simplest bill DOC's needed in a while. Any questions from the committee? Y'all are being magnificent today. I spoke too quick. Ms. Frazier?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's why I love this committee. So we done went from a felony to a misdemeanor.
Misdemeanor for
tobacco.
possession. Oh, you're talking about the tobacco?
Yeah, so if a family member comes in and bring any type of contraband, it's not a felony now, it's a misdemeanor.
Tell them to leave.
No, is it a misdemeanor if they get caught after they've gotten their warning? Again, if they come back
First
again?
offense, violating this code section should be guilty, the person shall be guilty of a misdemeanor of a high and aggravated nature, and upon the second and subsequent convictions of the offense, they'll be guilty of a felony.
Oh, second is a felony,
Yes.
okay. All right, that's better. Because, the first bill, we were about to lock up all the family members, look like.
Well,
Because
if you'll take a good look
Actually,
at
on
the
the
difference.
first offense, though.
If you take a good look at the difference in this and the original bill, we've tweaked this thing as such so that family members who are coming in with no intentions of transferring tobacco products, once told to back out, to take it back to the vehicle, then they've got that opportunity to do something. This is mostly for those people who come in with fanny packs full of cigarettes and stuff that they try to transfer to the inmates.
Right, well, Mr. Chairman, the only concern I had was you have family members that come and visit, but they have no intentions of, they might have their own personal tobacco or anything. And I did hear you say that they will take it back, I mean, they're gonna be asked to take it back to their cars or discard it.
You'll look at line 35 through 41, that should answer your question.
Okay, but my question at the last meeting was that we have to inform these family members that this is a law or a possibility of a law, because some of them can come in and unintentionally get in trouble without knowing.
Yes, and I'll say again, if you look at line 35 through 41, this was a new language that we put in to clean up that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any further questions from any of the committee members? If not, what's the pleasure of the committee?
We'll be passed.
We have a motion. We have a second. Any further questions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Ayes have it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, we don't take testimony since we've already had all the testimony at the subcommittee meeting.
Was there in case you had questions? Just in case they had any.
Oh, thank you. All right, let's see. We've got one other, the chair's got one other bill. We're gonna take all of the Second Amendment bills toward the last. Is Ms. Ballinger, has she been able to get here yet? All right. I'm gonna bring to you House Bill 324. This bill was heard in the subcommittee with no action on it. This bill apparently created a little bit of a stir. Original intent of this was in the Motor Vehicle Committee, and I made an attempt to amend a bill there that was a Department of Driver Services bill. One of the concerns I've had after 20-something years of serving on motor vehicles, a driver's license is the first form of an ID that people have. And obviously, I just didn't take into account for political correctness, but I had made an amendment to it that said non-citizen. Under the current driver's license system, if you're not a citizen, then it has the term, Ike? Term limited. It has the limited term. One of the things that's bothered me for quite a while is the fact that what does limited term mean to the average citizen that sees a driver's license? And that was the intent of putting non-citizen on there. Now, I did move to send that bill back to the Motor Vehicle Committee, and we stripped it off to let the DDS bill go forward, and then I dropped this bill in. Since the subcommittee meeting, and I can assure you, obviously, the process works. I had told the committee members at that time that if they had a better idea or better verbiage that they could put into that would seem to be less or more sensitive, then I'd be more than glad to listen, but it's just clearly a way of stating the fact that someone is not eligible to vote or that driver's license can't be used for some other purpose other than who they are and for driving privileges. Well, after the meeting last week, I received a phone call from a young man who introduced himself and that he was a green card holder and assured me that as a non-citizen, he didn't have a problem with the concept of what I was talking about doing, except he said that he had heard that I had made the recommendation if anybody had a better idea of the verbiage. And he said at that point and wanted to assure me the reason he thought we needed to put this in was because when he got his driver's license, he said he almost had to get into a fight to keep from being registered to vote, even though he informed them numerous times that he wasn't voter eligible. And I bring this long story around to the fact, his suggestion to me was instead of using the term non-citizen, to use the term non-eligible voter or ineligible voter, that would seem to be a little bit or a good bit more acceptable to a lot of folks. I talked to one of the lobbyists who represents one of the Hispanic groups, and he said that he thought that was quite well. So that being said, I'm going to open this up to just a little bit of debate to see if anybody has any other teaking of the ideas, because if you'll look on the substitute of 1093S, then we've changed that on that band it would also state on an ineligible voter. Open the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly I want to commend you for your patience in listening to hours of debate on this particular subject and your willingness to understand the sensitivity that it brings to certain populations of people, in addition to narrowing the scope of the impact of this bill, because before the bill was so broad that a lot of unintended consequences could have been found in it. But my concern still, and my question is, if my grandchildren or my children were 15 to 18 years old, this ineligible voter or non-eligible voter would have to go across their driver's license, their learning permits, or their driver's license for 15 to 18 years old, because they would fall into the category of ineligible voters. The other thing is that if we're narrowing the scope now to simply address the concerns of voter fraud, then might I respectfully remind the chairman that there are 10 to 12 other forms of ID that can be used to vote. So it is not necessarily a driver's license that would be presented at the time of the vote. The other thing is that we would involve those international corporations that have employees here, or contractors here, or someone here in the number one state to do business, to try to open up corporations and different businesses here to create jobs and boost the economic development of this state, that would also be required under this statute to have an eligible voter on their ID. And then lastly, you have some non-U.S. citizens that have been here through a legal process from anywhere from 1 year to 12 years, being good Americans working their way to their citizenship, that would also be labeled as an ineligible voter. Now, I get it. I understand the intent of this. But those are some of the things that I think in the conversation we need to consider. And I do understand that you asked for a solution. I do understand you asked for suggestions and a solution. So I just want to throw those out there, kind of food for thought in the discussion, so that we make sure that we're considering the unintended consequences, as well as, even with this narrow scope, the population of people that it will impact.
All right. Anything else, Representative?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as I'm on this bill with you, I thought I'd make just a statement. I just really appreciate your work on this and your thoughtfulness. Listen to a lot of other people. I just had a question on the limited term. Will it stay on the license, or will this ineligible voter replace that where that is? How's that work?
I think has always been my understanding that it's an add to, because that term term limited, that's something that the federal government had put out there to be put on these licenses, and is typical federal government. It's not clear to me. It's not clear what that really means. You know, some of the law enforcement officers understand what it means. Some of them don't.
Well, that's one add. I did an interview with the Emory Wheel the other day, and I challenged the young lady to go to her English department and find what that term limited meant. And it was the silence on the other end, and offended that we would be doing this anyway. But I think your word, the ineligible voter, added a very good way to go.
I think it's pretty clear from that standpoint, but, you know, of course, I didn't mean for non-citizens to stir the world up. Let's talk 'em.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the effort on this. One of the questions that comes to mind is in terms of those who have been in the criminal justice system, because there's a move to try to get those folks back into the workplace. So do you have any sense of how this might impact those who have been felons? Would it be on their licenses while they're on probation and things of that nature?
This doesn't have anything to do with a natural citizen. This is only that 300,000 driver's licenses that are issued to people who are not citizens.
Okay.
Whether they be foreign dignitaries or company VPs here with the European or Japanese companies, if they're here for a prolonged period of time, under the current Georgia statute, if you're here over a certain period of time, you have to have a Georgia driver's license, albeit how temporary it may be. If you are a person that is a non-deportable alien under the DACA statutes, you get a driver's license. You know, and it's just basically anybody that's not. So, you know, this wouldn't have anything to do with someone who's been convicted, because they are a citizen.
Okay.
Plus, in the state of Georgia, as you probably know, if I'm correct in what I'm fixing to say, is that once you are a convicted felon in the state of Georgia and you go to prison, do whatever time you're going to do, once you're out, then you automatically have your voting rights reinstored once you've completed that sentence.
Right, that's why I was asking about the probation, but I appreciate your limiting the scope. I wasn't aware of how broad it was going to be applied.
Any questions, any other questions? Any ideas for anything that might be more, more palatable than ineligible voter to be on this band?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know that a lot of folks are still uncomfortable with it, no matter what language we put in it. But if we were to, rather than put something like ineligible voter or non-eligible voter, if we would simply add a number or an alphabet to, for instance, if you had a C-class license, you could make it a C1 or C whatever, that would identify a person that's ineligible to vote without saying ineligible or non-eligible voter. And it would be less letters, it would be less space on the ID card, and it would on the driver's license, and it would serve the same purpose because that code would be explained in the policy for obtaining driver's license. So if we were to put a code in there, rather than some language that might be insensitive or might be considered as insensitive, or targeting a certain population of people might work better. I don't know.
Ms. Frazier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really struggling with this over here. I'm trying to have an open mind, but I need some clarity on why are we identifying ineligible voters? What's the purpose of it?
Well, the original purpose wasn't to identify an ineligible voters as much as it was to say that this Georgia driver's license is being issued is the first step toward any type of an ID. So the first language put in was non-citizen, since that's a common denominator. That whether you're here illegally or legally, with a visa, without a visa, that you're a non-citizen. Well, since that seemed to have stirred a lot of the ire that we were being insensitive, then at the suggestion of the young guy that identified himself as a green card holder, then that's where the ineligible voter came from. Now, I understand from what Representative Glanton's speaking from, but if you go down into there, most people, unless you're a law enforcement officer, you don't look at the information on there, the classifications, such as C for commercial, M for motorcycle, and things like that, the branding on a license. And that's the reason I had thought about it just across the top, to join on the same band with that language of term limited, that we specifically say something so that the normal citizen would know what it means. An eligible voter, probably the closest I've run across as far as a suggestion that would tell folks that this is not a citizen, but being a little bit more kinder and gentler.
I'll follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
You said that this would tell folk that this person is not a citizen. Who are we telling?
Well, I suggest we'd be telling the folks if somebody tried to register them to vote.
But, Mr. Chairman, if they go to register to vote, their name is not on the list. They already have mechanism in place to check whether you are an eligible voter. So I'm just trying to wrap.
Well, obviously, from the representative coming from the gentleman that had called that identified himself as an immigrant with a green card, when he went to get his license, as he said, he almost had to fight with them not to register him to vote. There's a flaw somewhere in this system. There's a flaw there.
Mr. Chairman,
So
is that just one isolated case? Is that just one isolated case where we got to change the state law? Is that just one case where that person went in and couldn't identify themselves through their current registration or ID that they had?
I don't know.
I'm just trying to see what is the purpose of it for us to make
I'm
local.
not sure that's an isolated case. That's the only case that somebody had brought up voluntarily as a visa carrying resident.
Thank you.
Number 17.
That'd be me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I've just got a
Collins.
couple of questions because I'm new here to the game.
All right.
But I don't think it's asking too much when we have a government issued ID. And there are a lot of people out there who look at that and say, this person probably is a U.S. citizen or a resident of the state of Georgia because they have a state issued identification. I mean, you know, either you are or you're not a citizen. Either you are or you're not registered to vote. And this ID seems to me that it's very hard for the general public out there to differentiate who is a legal U.S. citizen and who is not. I'm proud to be a U.S. citizen. I'm proud to be a U.S. citizen if I'm in the country or I'm not. I'm not trying to become something I'm not if I'm out of the country. So I'm trying to understand here. We're trying to make everybody feel great, and we're not going to be able to do that. But at the same time, we have people back home who look to us for guidance. If you own a business here in this state and you're going to take a check on someone and you have that transaction take place, 9 times out of 10, you ask for a driver's license. If I'm someone out there owning a business, I'm going to look at that driver's license and think, hey, this person lives right around the corner. I may or may not take that check if they're not a U.S. citizen. I'm assuming a lot of liability as a business owner if I do that, if they're not a U.S. citizen. They're not a registered. I don't understand. I'm a little confused here, and I look to this body to make me feel more warm and fuzzy about why we don't need to do this.
Thank you. Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, once again. When you talk about flaw, the only flaw in the analogy that you've used that I can see is the flaw in the policy that allows for a person who is not eligible for a driver's license to get one. The flaw further lies with the internal employees that would give that person a driver's license. So if the folks who we have instilled our faith in to make sure that we're only issuing licenses to people who are eligible for licenses, then there would be no cause in my mind to identify someone as being ineligible for a license. And if the scope of this particular measure is simply to ensure that driver's licenses are not issued to people who are ineligible and who would subsequently use those licenses to vote, again, you have 10 other forms of ID that allows a person to vote in this state and in this country. So I guess I'm trying to understand and on basically what Representative Frazier said, there are 10.5 million Georgians. And if we hear from 2 of those 10.5, and we can extract 300,000 that may not be citizens, I accept that, you're still looking at a very minimum of people that are able to game the system. To get a driver's license, you have to present a utility bill, a birth certificate, a social security card. There are so many checks and balances in place in order for you to get a legitimate driver's license that if the folks at DDS are doing their due diligence and their jobs, and I'm sure they are, you wouldn't get one. So there would be no reason to issue a driver's license saying you're not eligible if they've gone through the litmus or the list of things that make you eligible. And if you don't have those things that make you eligible, then that's automatic without a code. So I'm trying to understand, under the narrow scope of fraudulent license for voting purposes, I'm trying to understand what is the intent of the measure.
You've got me thoroughly confused now because
I didn't mean to confuse you,
the
Mr. Chairman.
license isn't to stop a driver's license. They give a driver's license to whoever is eligible, and also as dictated by the feds on folks that are not legal. But the only thing we're trying to do here is say that if you've got a driver's license that is the first form of an ID, and most of us still believe, regardless of a lot of the other stuff under security today, that a driver's license issued by the state of Georgia is still the first form of an ID. And that's what we're trying to do. And how it's evolved from that is this term limited that's on there. Just what does term limited mean? I haven't found a lot of folks that can tell me exactly
I don't know
what they thought it could mean. When I brought up, I think at the subcommittees, and I've told everybody, if you got a better idea of something to put out there. Well, it took a guy who's here with a visa and a green card to find and make a suggestion. And his suggestion was either ineligible voter or non-eligible voter. And I guess that pretty well, if you're looking at an ID and it says ineligible or non-eligible, that's probably the only thing that brands that license that, you know, that person's not eligible to vote.
Well, Mr. Chairman, all due respect, and you know I have a lot of respect for you. When I go to vote and I have a driver's license, I choose to use my driver's license rather than other forms of ID. I'm going to go through 3 tiers of folk that are going to check to make sure that I'm on the rolls, that I'm an eligible voter. They're going to look on that list. They're going to look at my name. They're going to compare my address. They're going to look at my voting history. And only then would they determine that I am an eligible voter. And if they can't find me on that list, then they're going to, under current provisions, they're going to allow me to cast a provisional ballot. And in that provisional ballot process, they are going to research and investigate in regards to whether I am in fact who I say I am and that I'm an eligible voter. And in that process, they will also eliminate me as an eligible voter if they can't prove it. So we're right back where we were if we're looking at the narrow scope of voter fraud and ID cards with people that are ineligible voters.
Tough question, isn't it?
It's a very tough question, Mr. Chairman, and you know, I understand what I understand the intent of what you're trying to do, and I support what you're trying to do. I just don't know if this is the way to do it, and I don't know if this is the way to get there. I just don't see. I don't see us being able to stop fraudulent voting any way more than what we're doing already in the processes. So if DDS, and I'm not picking on DDS just happens to be the department that this comes through. If the folks at DDS are doing their job to ensure that these people that are getting driver's licenses, okay, or actually, because they register a lot of these people on the voter files right there at the driver's license place. So part of that process is to make sure that you're eligible to vote before they sign you up.
Well, according to the gentleman that called me, apparently they need that stamp on there for no other reason in case they just want.
Well, I would suggest humbly and respectfully, Mr. Chairman, that you have that gentleman come here. I'll get a stamp and I'll stamp his driver's license. But we shouldn't stamp 10.5 million Georgians because he believes that we should. Or 300,000 people who may or may not be registered. I get you, Mr. Chairman. Be more than happy to stamp it.
Thank you. Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Glanton. I've got my driver's license here, and I'm just looking at it. It's a commercial driver's license. I used to drive a bus, but school bus, hard to believe. But there's some things on here, I don't know what they are now. A little gold star on the side of it. And I look at this thing, it's a sophisticated identification document today. And we use it for ID, and we use it for voter ID. And those 10 forms that we're talking about, maybe we need to look at those to make sure that they can't be used to obfuscate the process, because we consistently hear about, voter fraud in local precincts, and it comes up, and I think this is on there, they're less likely to try, and I think it'd be easy for someone to look at and identify, and that's why I support Chairman Powell's measure.
Mr. Chairman, if I might. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying rather than not put a code on this driver's license, I have one too, it's not commercial, but I do have one. Rather than not putting it on here, that we put it on here and then we put it on all the other eligible documents that we submit. Social security cards, visas, passports, the dog's collar. I mean, what all do we put it on?
Well, I guess some of us, or maybe just me in particular, that the creation of a consistent, well-looked-at voter list and voter ID and voter being done right is just tremendously important.
So what evidence, what data, what examples in a significant number that you can use to support that suggestion?
Well, I'm sure we can dig them up, but I'm not,
You can at least get one.
we've got one for sure.
Okay.
All right. Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So actually, this is a voter fraud bill, my understanding now. First, we were talking about ineligible voters and immigrants coming to the state of Georgia. Now we're talking about voter fraud. So if they see that ineligible stamp on that card, they'll know that that person is not eligible to vote. We're down to voting now. Is that true?
Unless you have another idea, and this offer has been on the table for 2 weeks now, if you have another idea of better verbiage that's kinder and gentler or more sensitive to the genteel nature of these folks, this chair and the author of this bill has been wide open. I have heard nothing.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I do not have any type of verbiage, and I do respect, your opinion to have this bill, but I don't see the necessity of this bill because one person had a situation. I just see that we are creating problems, and I don't even know what the financial cost of all this to be to bring folks back in and restamp their driving license, and I just see a lot of questions up ahead for this. I don't see a need for this right now. And
Well,
so
I
I don't
certainly
have
do.
anything else to offer for it.
I
Thank
certainly
you.
do appreciate it, and it was never in my intention to turn this into a partisan issue. But I will answer your question about cost. There is no cost. Department, this is effective next year in 18, I think July of 18, because there's an RFP going out right now for new driver's licenses. This only goes into effect upon the next cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? If not, what's the will of the committee? We have a motion. We have a second. Any further questions? Any amendments anybody wants to bring up? I thought that'd get your attention.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I was about to take my last breath, but since you gave it back.
No, ma'am. That was in the subcommittee.
There are other individuals here that were not attending at the subcommittee, and it was our understanding that the subcommittee was going to work on the bill, and we anticipated that it would come back in front of the subcommittee for future public comment. There are multiple individuals who are here that would like to speak on the bill.
Have you got any good solutions to any language for this?
I personally don't. I don't know if they do, but I know that there is quite a bit of individuals that would like to speak with you about this bill.
Let me suspend action on this bill for just a second. Is Ms. Ballinger here yet?
No, sir.
Tell you what, we've got 3 of the firearms bills, Second Amendment bills. I'm going to deviate from the rule of this committee today. Very limited testimony. How many people are we talking about?
It's 2 minutes.
At least 2, Mr. Chairman, 3 if there's time available.
I believe we can limited discussion, please.
We certainly can. Speaking here,
Would 3 minutes be enough time?
that will be enough, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
Wonderful. My name is Maria Palacios. I'm the lobbyist for the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. And I just have 5 brief points. I made an outline to make sure I was brief. I just got off the phone and have confirmed that the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, President Santiago Marquez, does not support this bill. He does indeed oppose this bill. He feels it's not very welcoming for new businesses, which I will touch on later on my 5th point. But my first point to start off, the limited term, to clarify where some of that came from. If you look at USCIS.gov, they explained that the reasoning for limited term was to make sure that driver's licenses did not expire past when a green card expired. So that's where limited term has come about, right? So I know there's been a lot of discussion and confusion about if we have limited term, why not other things that indicate a lawful status or a legal presence? But limited term had to do more with expiration dates than it did with a lawful status. So I wanted to go ahead and point that out. The second point I wanted to point out as well is the purpose for voting. Since 2014, the coalition that we've worked with, we've naturalized 50,000 legal permanent residents who became citizens. And the requirement as of now is that they do not have to change their driver's license to register to vote. Adding an eligible voter to legal permanent residents' driver's licenses, which is what this bill would do, would have to make them change their license before they're eligible to sign up to vote, and also before they're eligible to vote, period. So that would pose, if we had retroactively done this to 2014, that would have alone posed problems for 50,000 people that we've registered to vote since 2014. My third point is imagining the actual process at the Department of Driver Services, and I'm sure this would cause more paperwork for someone to sign that they are indeed eligible to vote, which is currently a requirement, right? That they check off in that clause that they are eligible to vote if they decide to register to vote there. So that could cause more problems if people don't understand that they're checking off that they're eligible to vote when they're not eligible to vote. We see this problem sometimes when we're registering legal permanent residents to vote. I'm a legal permanent resident, and I know I'm not eligible to vote, although I've had lawful status and went through the proper paperwork for it. So you're also, adding more paperwork and confusion there. From a fourth standpoint, I know there was a discussion about, well, if I was a small business owner, I wouldn't want to cash a check for someone who's not a citizen. Well, that is huge fraud, right? For citizens or for people who don't have the funds, the proper funds, or who can't honor a check. So I think there's already things in place to keep that stuff in check. So I don't think the issue's there. I don't think a DACA recipient or a legal permanent resident would risk their lawful status by writing a bad check. And the last thing I really want to point out, 450 of the Fortune 500 companies in the state of Georgia have a presence here, right? And we know those have a lot of global VPs, a lot of senior management that come to do here. This bill doesn't sound very welcoming to some of the people that we like to do business with, right? We say our workforce is the most trained across the nation, and I truly believe that in Georgia we have that competitive advantage to attract a lot of businesses. This bill would be discouraging to any of those non-citizens that operate in it, including 18 of those Fortune 500 companies that have a global headquarters here. So I find it problematic from a business standpoint as well. And that's the end of my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions from any of the committee? Yes,
Good,
ma'am.
good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee. I'm Helen Butler, Executive Director of the Coalition for the People's Agenda, convened by Dr. Joseph Lowry. And I won't reiterate all of the points that she just did, but those are similar. I do want to say that Mr. Glanton, Representative Glanton, gave you eloquent reasons why this shouldn't be put on the licenses. I'm a member of a board of elections and have attended many events. I do voter registration, attended election board meetings, have not found anyone that actually committed voter fraud by the use of identification purposes. We have, as Representative Glanton said, when you're a first-time voter, you can use one of 17 pieces, which doesn't have to be a photo ID. And so otherwise, you have 6 pieces that you can be used for identification purposes to vote. And there are processes in place that prevent ineligible people from registering to vote. So there is no need. There hasn't been any voter fraud. I would suggest that you ask the Secretary of State to actually present you the actual numbers of voter frauds because of being a non-citizen, and you will find that those are minuscule compared to the number of voters that have voted in the state of Georgia. We feel this is necessary, and Representative Glanton really gave you great solutions.
Thank you, ma'am. Sounds to me like probably we're right back to the first choice of putting non-citizen on there. That might be the best idea then.
No.
You had a chance, Mike.
No, I'm telling you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I'm a small business owner in Georgia here in Atlanta, and I've been listening to the discussion, and my primary concern is, as a small business owner, I always have so many things to look at when I have to hire somebody, and I do have some green card holders in my business. So the idea that, I know what you all are trying to do, and I really appreciate, the intent here and I'm sympathetic to it. That said, if I look at the back of a license and I see ineligible voter, if I'm a typical businessman, maybe a large business might understand that, but I think it's going to cause some confusion. And I think there may be some decisions made, by small business owners not to move forward with somebody that is ineligible to vote. We talked about the felons. What does this mean? It is, it's not a definition that any of us are familiar with, really. So my concern has to do with, the possibility that some of these employers might not hire the right person. And, maybe that person does have a green card. Maybe the practical effect of this is that, some of these businesses pass on those folks. And that could be, that could lead to some discriminatory results. And, us employers out here, we can get sued for that kind of stuff, too. So I think, from my standpoint, I want to, underscore that I am very sympathetic to the objective. But I also am a practical business guy, and I want to hire the right person. And I know there are a lot of folks that I work with out there that have small businesses too. And I think, I don't want me or them to get in a trap here where they're, refusing to hire the right person or ignoring that language. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just wanted to say thank you for listening to the public testimony.
I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, and make it explicitly clear that I don't like this bill. I don't think it's a necessary bill. But at the appropriate time, I would like to offer an amendment to the bill. At the appropriate time, I'd like to offer an amendment to the bill.
This would be the proper time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would amend that on line 14, that after the word term, that we strike the words ineligible voter, and that we insert something that has to do with a code rather than word. As I stated earlier in my testimony, rather than saying ineligible voter, non-citizen, non-eligible voter, that we simply put a code, C1, C3, C whatever, code on there, so that we do not have insensitive languages on driver's licenses here in the United States of America.
Have you got the code that you'd like to put on there?
Well, I don't. I would have to talk to DDS. I don't know if there's such a thing as a C1 code. If it's not, I'd like to put in a C1 code. If there's something else that's a C1 code, we go from there. But my suggestion would just make it, if it's a Class C, it'd be a C1, and so on and so forth. But if we're only talking about voter implications for voter fraud in that narrow scope, I just think, again, Mr. Chairman, without beating this drum too long, I just think that we're bringing populations of folks into this equation that we may not want to. And I also think that when you're talking about my children and my grandchildren, for them to be labeled simply because they have not acquired the age to get a driver's license and they got that code on there, I think it's unfair to them, especially in light of the fact that you can use, I believe Ms. Butler said, 17 different forms of ID to vote. So if this is in fact about voter fraud, there are policies and procedures and laws in place right now to address those issues. Folks just need to do their due diligence in their jobs to ensure that the system is not violated. But other than that, Mr. Chairman, I would offer an amendment of a code versus the ineligible voter.
Well, the chair recognizes you right now to make that specific, unless you want me to go to the next question or while you draw it out. Chair will be glad to give you time, and I'll move to the next person wishing to speak. Give you a little time to draw this.
Where did DDS guy go? He was here. Oh, he's back there. Let me talk to Mike for a minute, if you don't mind, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
right ahead. Ms. Frazier?
That was me, Mr. Chairman, number
Oh,
14.
I'm sorry, Ms. Jackson.
I was, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to offer a suggestion on what Representative Glanton said. If you were going to come up with a code, since it does say ineligible voter, let's use the I and the V as IV class. If he would.
It's the wishes of the committee. If you want to make that in the proper time, if you want to make that into a motion.
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that if we come up with a code, we use the initials IV for code.
All right. Let me see if anyone else wishes to be heard while we're waiting, and we're fixing to move on to see the author here. All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Now, those who wish to offer an amendment. Representative Jackson?
Yes, sir.
All right. Working from LC 1093S.
Working for LC 1093S, offer amendment that we use the code IV for the driver's license.
All right. So you're saying on line 14.
On line 14.
Strike ineligible voter.
Yes, sir.
And replace that with the term capital IV.
IV. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second to the motion? I'm sorry, Mac. I don't even think your caucus members want to second that one.
I don't think Mike heard me.
Yes, sir.
We
Well, we were looking for a second to Representative Jackson's motion.
and what was his motion? I apologize.
His motion was on line 14 to strike the word ineligible voter and replace it in capital letters IV.
IV mean, okay, the initials. So you're waiting on a second?
Well, waiting on a second. If there's no second, then it would die from the lack of a second, which it looks like it's fixing to die for the lack of a second. Anyone wish to second the motion? If not, let's move on. Any other motions?
Okay, now back to my amendment. And Mr. Chairman, I do believe that no matter what we do here, we're gonna run afoul of the Civil Rights Amendment, Civil Rights Act. And we're gonna find ourselves adjudication in the courts and behind this particular measure. But in light of what we're doing here today, what I would suggest now is that on line 14, at the end of the words, the term, we would put something in there in nature to the effect that the department would determine a code based on department policy. And the reason I said that, and that's not necessarily language, Mr. Chairman, the reason I said that is because they have a variation of codes and endorsements that they're using already. And so for us to come and actually offer a code not knowing what their code structure is would be ill-advised. And so I would suggest that the department, if you insist on, or this committee insists on doing this, then I would suggest that we would leave the actual coming up with the code to the department. Well, it wasn't a long motion. It was a motion and an explanation, Mr. Representative.
Well, can you draw that down specifically? Or
Okay.
Julius can probably.
Julius, can you help me out here? Basically, I want the department to determine what the code is.
All right. Do we have a second? We do have a second. Any further questions about this proposed amendment? If not, all in favor say aye.
Can you read the amendment first, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly. Julius, would you like to read the representative's amendment?
I guess we would say, the line 14 will say, I was reading the entire thing. A temporary license, permit, or special identification card issued pursuant to this code section shall include a unique designation for such temporary license, permit, or special identification card as determined by the department.
All right. We have a motion and we have a second. Any further questions? Yeah, all in favor say aye. Voting on his amendment. Opposed? Noes apparently have it. Y'all rather see that, everybody raise their hand.
Oh, I'm satisfied with it, Mr. Chairman. I mean,
All right, we're back to the original motion. Any other motions to amend? Any questions? If there's no other motions to amend, if not, all in favor of the adoption of LC 41-1093S, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
no.
And the ayes have it, and it moves forward. Mr. Allinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. House Bill 280 is up next. Representative Ballinger, I believe you're here to present that to us. Let's see, just a second here.
Just Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today House Bill 280. We are working from LC 411090S. The substantive change, we've had a couple of subcommittee hearings. We've also had one full committee hearing. So after conversation with some other interested parties, there was one additional change that we wanted to make. We did change the preschool space from 1 to 3. So the preschool space exemption would go away if you designated more than 1, and that has been changed to more than 3. If you'll find that change at the very bottom of the first page on line 24. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I know a lot of people, if they have any substantive questions about the bill, I've presented it a couple times now to the committee and subcommittee, so I think it's been pretty well vetted, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
We do have one. Representative Jackson, number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative.
Yes.
When you just talked about the space being changed, has more than, on line 24 it says, a post-secondary education has more than 3 buildings on the campus housing preschool space.
Yes.
So that means that it has to be 3 daycare.
No, if it has more than 3. So you can have 1, you can have 2, or you can have 3. Right now, the University of Georgia has 3 preschools, hence the change.
So a school that, a smaller.
I'm sorry, what?
A school with less than 3. That means that you wouldn't be able to carry?
Well, no, the exemption, in other words, the concern was that everybody would just go around saying preschool, 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 preschool. Mm-hmm. So if you have more than, if you have 10 buildings on your campus and you designate all 10 of them as preschools, then the exemption would go away. In other words, you would be able to carry anywhere. But if you only have 3 buildings, then the exemption still carries. In other words, you would not be able to carry in the preschool classroom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Frazier, go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Representative Ballinger, can you explain to me, if we pass this bill, how will campus police be able to discern between a good guy and a bad guy with a gun on campus?
How can they discern now?
I'm asking you, since it's your legislation, how will they be able to determine?
Well, and I'm asking you, how do they determine now?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
It's the same thing.
Well, how do they do it now on campuses?
This bill allows good people to carry on campus.
So how will they determine who's the criminal and who's the good guy?
The guy committing the crime is usually the criminal.
Okay. And so, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Follow up. And so how will this also determine if we have students, because we have about 3/4 of our students that are on campus are under the age of 21. Mm-hmm. And so if we have these young kids that's on the campus, especially females who are all over the campus, how will this determine the older students coercing some of the younger students on campus and as it relates to rape?
Well, this bill seeks to provide additional protections for female students because basically right now what we've created by banning law-abiding citizens from protecting themselves on college campuses is we have created a victim zone. Bad guys, if they want to attack a female, they know that a female coming out of general classroom building at Georgia State University with a backpack over her shoulder is unarmed.
Right.
So this is changing the dynamic, and it's allowing people and affording them the opportunity to defend themselves.
Thank you.
Representative number 23, Representative Jaspers. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Ballinger, for working on this. I just received a text from a person in Milledgeville to inform me that Georgia College Public Safety, and this is to answer your question, identified a suspect in a rape reported on campus at 2:30 on Saturday, and goes through the details about that. But I just bring that up to just emphasize this is about not making people victims, and I'm certain that this person, if they were able to have a weapon, would have certainly enjoyed the rights afforded to have one at that moment. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions of the committee? Representative Petrie.
Yeah, Representative Ballinger, is it not true that concealed carry permit holders in this country are the safest, most law-abiding demographic possibly anywhere in the country?
Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I will ask number 22. Go ahead.
Representative, is it not true since we passed HB 60, which a lot of people said back then would become the Wild Wild West, is it not true that since then that has not been an issue, since we're only giving weapons to those who are law-abiding and have passed a background check?
Yes, that's correct.
Number 14. Representative, yes.
Am I on? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ballard, just
Yes.
another friendly question, just
Yes.
to clear something up.
Sure.
On line 19, and I think I've counted them right, there are 3 places where they are not allowed. On line 19, that would be athletic or sport events, student housing, including but not limited to fraternity and sorority houses.
Yes.
So those are the 3 places that the guns would not be allowed.
Mhm.
But if a person was living in the dorm,
Mhm.
he would be allowed to keep his gun where?
Well, he obviously would not be able to keep his gun on the in the dormitory under this legislation.
Mhm.
However, this particular piece of legislation, it's about changing the dynamic. Right now we have created this preserve where disarmed, law-abiding citizens are not able to defend themselves, are not able to arm themselves, and this is a permissive bill that would just basically allow people the basic, essential right of self-preservation.
Thank you. I was just wondering.
Oh,
'cause,
sorry.
Normally where I live, I want my gun near me too, at my house. But you can't keep it in the dormitory where you live.
Yes. I certainly understand your concern there, but unfortunately, but most of the people that are over the 21 that would be contemplated under this bill don't actually reside on university housing. So,
Any other questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion. Have a do pass and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I believe the ayes have it. Thank you very much.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you, Chairman Lunston. All right, next up, we have 2 bills, 406 and 292. Would you rather for us to do 406 and amend that, perfect that, and then add it to yours? All right, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we have 2 bills left, 406. let me speak briefly on this bill. You'll notice behind it's a very short bill. It's to the point. The work of this committee over the years on reciprocity, we have run into a problem that exists right now in reciprocity. Starts with the state of Virginia. State of Virginia does not recognize any citizen for a concealed weapons permit and carry permit under the age of 21. Under Georgia law, we recognize 18 to 21 if they have been in the military and honorably discharged. Still, that does not, still the state of Virginia does not recognize that specific part of our law. There's also several other states, I understand, that also, they just haven't called a question on it. What we're trying to do is to keep a system of reciprocity with all of these states. This one specifically deals with Virginia and possibly the other 12 states if they decide to make an issue not to recognize Georgia. What we're saying in this legislation, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll look on line 17, that such licensee licensed to carry a weapon in any other state shall carry that weapon in compliance with the laws of this state, and no other state shall be recognized shall be required to recognize and to give effect to a license issued pursuant to this part is held by a person who is younger than 21. What we're saying is that if you recognize Georgia's law, permit holders, fine, except for those, if it is your state law that you don't recognize someone under the age of 21, then we will honor that if you will honor Georgia law. Very simple, straightforward. There was a couple of things that we wanted to add to that, I do believe, Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Section 2, I'd like to add that this bill becomes effective on the signature of the governor. I believe that's appropriate. We'd have to ask our crack team in the legal department if that's the right way to say that. Okay, that is.
All right. And I think we were also thinking about some language in here. The Attorney General is the current depository and the expert on reciprocity and what states reciprocate with Georgia. And I think that it's been brought up that maybe we need to put an amendment in here that spells out that the Attorney General shall post on their website the status of the states in reciprocity to Georgia. Julius, if you'll get that back, and I'll call on you and you can read that out. Yeah. Julius, you ready? All right, committee members, 2 amendments. The first one was Chairman Jaspers, and then this one. Julius, if you'll read these 2 amendments.
First amendment is to add an effective date where the bill will be effective upon signature
Correct.
of the governor. The second amendment is that we're going to add a subsection E.1, and to read, the Attorney General shall publicly post all states whose laws recognize and give effect to a license issued pursuant to this part.
Good. All right. Sounds good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have two proposed amendments to this bill. What is the will of the committee?
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we accept both amendments.
We have a motion that we accept both amendments. We have a second. Any questions? Any comments? Does everybody, all members, understand the amendments? I beg your pardon? First Amendment says that the Attorney General's office shall post on their website the status of reciprocity in what states with Georgia. Second Amendment, this goes into effect upon the signatures of the governor. All right. All right. We have a motion, we have a second. Any questions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now we move on to House Bill 292. Chairman Jaspers. Oh, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. House Bill 406 as a committee substitute as amended. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that's correct. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right. House Bill 292. All right, we'll just stand in recess for a couple of minutes while Chairman Jasper is getting some verbiage down.
only change I'd like to make and make in form of an amendment is on line 95. And been into some discussion with Probate Judges Council on this date on line 95 and 96. You know, we had initially changed it to 10 days from 30. And that's law enforcement shall report to judge all this. And we've kind of come to just a midway that should be 20 days. With the will of the committee, I'd like to change that on line 95. You'll keep the cross out on 96, change it to 20. And the only other change, Mr. Chairman, was would like to add House Bill 406 to this, to 292 in the appropriate place, which I assume would be at the end. And for the committee, 406 is the one we just voted on with Chairman Powell.
406 was a previous bill that we did about reciprocity with other states. That if they don't, if their law doesn't recognize under 21. And the reason, and I'll state the reason we're adding this to this bill as well as the one we just passed, there's going to be a certain convention that's going to be in Atlanta, a national convention from Virginia. It's the NRA National Convention that'll be here in the end of April. And we wanted to be sure that those people coming to delegates, that we reciprocate with them, if that's their wishes. So there's the reason, there's the rationale as to why we're running that reciprocity-based issue out. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, so we're taking the language out of 406 and putting it in here?
We're gonna put the same language from 406, add it to
So where we gonna put it?
That's on the end. Julius has it.
Section 1 of House Bill 46 and the 406 combine that into section of House Bill 292.
All right. We've got two amendments.
Yes.
All right. All right, first order of business. Who's number 20? All right. Yes, sir.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
I think this would be the appropriate time.
I move that we accept both the amendments that have been mentioned.
All right, as a committee substitute. Does everybody understand both of those amendments? One changing the 10 to 20 days and the other adding the language of 406 on reciprocity. All right. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions concerning the amendments? All in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, now we're back to the original question. We have a motion on the floor.
I make a motion that we pass Bill 292 as presented with the one change.
As a committee substitute. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Mr. Chairman, there will be two changes instead. We said one change.
Two changes. One was changing the 10 days to 20.
No, I got it. He just said.
Yeah,
All right.
you're right.
Amendment with one change. We need to.
All right, we have a motion and a second to forward House Bill 292 on as a committee substitute. Any further questions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Shocking. And the ayes clearly have it. I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen of the committee and all people in attendance today. And this meeting will now stand adjourned.
Oh, no, it's cool, man.